Welcome to the Best Little Town Podcast, your go-to source for everything happening in the town of Bedford's local government. Whether it's new initiatives or important decisions shaping our town's future, you'll hear it right here. This podcast is dedicated to keeping our residents informed and engaged.
Hello and welcome to the Best Little Town Podcast, a presentation of the town of Bedford in cooperation with our partners at Media Squatch, wherein we provide a recap of the most recent town council meeting and a little bit more information about some of the details that were discussed in an effort to fully inform and engage with our citizens, businesses, and anyone who's interested in what happens in the town of Bedford. My name is Bart Warner. I have the privilege of serving as the town manager, and it is Wednesday morning, March 18th. Last night we had a council meeting on March 17th. Again, those happen on the first and third Tuesdays of every month at 7 p.m. in our municipal building located at 215 East Main Street. Council chamber is upstairs. Always happy to have people come join us for those if you can make it in person. We also live stream those, and we offer recordings of those on youtube.com. Just search for Town of Bedford, Virginia. And in addition to that, in this podcast, we also post the minutes of meetings once they are approved to our website at www.bedfordva.gov. Again, last night we did have a regular council meeting. That was preceded by a meeting of the Streets Committee. The Streets Committee is a smaller group of council comprised of Mayor C.G. Stanley, Vice Mayor Darrell Updike, and Councilman Jay Ippolito. They were talking about policies related to banners and displays of those on the public right-of-way. And I know that sounds like a potentially mundane topic, but there are several complications associated with that we needed to speak with. A lot of that relates to space, time, and location of certain displays. Our town attorney, Mike Lockaby, was also on hand to advise us of certain legal factors related to the issue, such as free speech and making sure that we do not do anything we're not supposed to. So that meeting took place prior to the regular council meeting at 6 o'clock p.m. I can report that council members made some really good progress. They are working on a policy that will be presented to the full council as soon as we provide some details and fill in some blanks on that. Hope to get that before them in April if we can. I know that Public Works is already working to provide some of the documentation that was requested. We then went upstairs to the council chambers at 7 p.m. and the meeting was called to order. The first item of business was approval of the minutes from the March 3rd meeting. That was taken care of. I do need to report that Councilman Stacy Haley was not present. He advised us that he had a conflict on last night's date and he would not be present. So all other council members were at the dais and doing their thing. After the approval of the minutes, it was then time for the report of town manager. First thing I reported last night was that spring cleanup week is scheduled to take place on April 6th through 10th. This is a semi-annual event that largely involves the pickup of bulk goods at the curbside for customers who pay the refuse collection fees. If anyone has any specific questions, please contact the Public Works Department directly at 540-587-6081. We do this in the spring and the fall, and again, it's a service that is covered by the refuse collection fee if you participate. And if you're doing spring cleaning, got some old things you need to get out of the house and don't have a truck of your own, it's a great service. You just put it out at your normal place where you put your garbage can, and during that week, Public Works will pick it up. And again, if you have any questions, you can call directly. The next item was an update on the implementation of the Downtown Action Strategy. The town attorney, Mike Lockaby, is working on incorporating amendments to the proposed vacant property registration ordinance that were suggested by council at a previous meeting. Once Mike completes his work incorporating that into the draft, we will then have a public hearing and formal review by council, and we will get that on the agenda just as soon as we possibly can. The other thing we reported on was the fact that staff is also planning to install string lights on North Bridge Street parallel to the roadway along existing light poles. Also reported last night that our most recent monthly bill from AMP for our power that the town purchases on behalf of the community was $2.1 million, which is still higher than we would prefer, but down considerably from the previous month, which, as I reported then, that bill was $3.5 million. So, as I commented last night, that's good news of a sort. It certainly indicates that usage is down from one month to another, and we expect that we will all see the benefit of that in the bills we receive moving forward. Finally, I recognize the contributions of Miss Sarah Broughton, who passed away recently. A lot of people in the community knew Sarah. She was quite the icon and quite active. Sarah was the first executive director of the Bauer Center on North Bridge Street, but honestly, she was much more than that. Along with her husband, Bruce Johannesson, who was a former council member, Sarah had great passion and concern for Bedford, which was certainly demonstrated through her actions and deeds. Would ask that you remember Bruce and their family in your thoughts and prayers, and certainly Sarah Broughton is a great light in our community that will be greatly missed. Getting back to the council agenda, the next item was appearances before council. That is a part of the meeting where we allow people to sign up in advance and speak for 3 minutes on, frankly, any topic that's near and dear to their heart. Last night, Mr. Josh Leamy, who is a resident of Shearer Avenue, got up and spoke to one of the items on the new business portion of the agenda, which was the temporary closure of Macon Street through traffic. Mr. Leamy noted that he manages a farm on vacant lots adjacent to the area that is targeted for the closure. In particular, he also has some hay fields that he needs access to. And we noted later on in the meeting that we are having to close this for certain reasons, and I'll get into that in a minute, but we will provide access to the folks that need it. So appreciate Mr. Leamy bringing that to our attention. Next speaker was Ms. Leslie Mahaffey of Woodland Road. Leslie shared a Facebook post regarding the Vietnam Memorial, which was dedicated back on November 22nd. Shared her personal views that she was glad it has been included in the marketing efforts and promotional materials for town. Noted that on that occasion on November 22nd, there were 4 Vietnam veterans who attended the dedication event. Since that time, they have unfortunately passed away. Those veterans are David Thomas, Owen Fox Overstreet, Gene Smith, and Roger Clark most recently. Ms. Mahaffey then went on to read the Facebook post recognizing those men and their service to the country and their recent passing. Shared some comments in the thread there that noted that several people see the memorial as healing for veterans and their families, and just appreciate the fact that Leslie took the time to pass that information along at the public meeting. Next was council comments, beginning with Councilman Todd Foreman, who simply thanked all the people who were physically present. Next, Councilman Jay Ippolito reiterated Todd's appreciation of the folks who came out physically for the meeting. He had a few comments about the passing of Sarah Broughton and asked that everyone keep Bruce Johannesson in their prayers, and noted that Sarah's passing is certainly a great loss for the community. Next to speak was Vice Mayor Darrell Updike, who also expressed his appreciation for everyone who came out to the meeting. Darrell then went into sharing some views related to recent discussions about electric rates. He noted that in response to that, he was personally curious about comparisons to other utility companies that are adjacent to Bedford Electric, particularly AEP. Vice Mayor Updike noted that according to his research, in terms of rates, he found that AEP is actually $7.50 higher in terms of the rates they are charging compared with what we charge within our service territory. Darrell noted that in previous council meetings dealing with our efforts to manage and recover costs, council had received testimony that $5 makes a big difference, and that was in reference to previous fees that we have assessed in an effort to manage our costs to get the power to customers. In comparison, Darrell noted that he acknowledged the validity of that previous statement about $5, but shared his view that $7 on a regular basis is probably even more impactful. Basically, his conclusion was that while none of us are particularly happy about the increases in electric cost, it's very likely that people outside of the Bedford electric service area may actually be paying more. The other thing that Daryl spoke to was the response time for outages, and that is one particular focus of our electric department. As an aside, I will note that from an operational perspective, our goals with electric primarily are reliability, followed by affordability, and then independence. We're able to get the power back on the rare occasion that it goes out pretty quickly because that's our primary focus. And we're constantly trying to do things to improve and rebuild and maintain the system to avoid those kind of outages. Unfortunately, affordability is largely beyond our control because of economic factors that we have discussed and will discuss in the future and continue to discuss. But going back to Mr. Updike's comments, he did note that response times outside our service area are frequently higher. We hear that anecdotally. He also did note that in the wintertime, our usage is higher and then the average bills are typically higher. And he did call on me to ask for some insight into what was a typical bill for the town to receive from AMP for the power it purchases during the winter months. I made reference to a comment made by our electric director, John Wagner, back in September when we did the rate discussion and increase back then. John had noted that given the winter peak months, it would not be unusual for us to see bills of $2 million per month. And based on the February figures, we were right on top of that, $2.1 million. I did share my personal opinion that it's still too high, but probably was out of line in doing so. Daryl then spoke to the larger issue of costs. He shared his opinion that this probably started 35 to 40 years ago and relates directly to some government regulations affecting energy producers, many of whom have since gone out of business. The remaining facilities are lacking investment because of the uncertainty about the ability to continue to operate. That's particularly true of coal-fired plants, and we're seeing that. Basically, Daryl said his observation is that there are fewer people generating power, but a lot more people needing it, and noted that it's largely an economic matter of supply and demand. Daryl then went on to ask for people to be gracious in their dealings with staff, noted that he was aware of some situations where frustrated customers have spoken out, and are people who collect those payments at the front office have borne the brunt of some of that, and just asked for people to reconsider the way they interact with staff, and noted that the people collecting the bills are not the ones responsible for the costs themselves and have no control over that, and asked people to take that into account. Daryl also noted that certain structures are more efficient than others. He specifically cited an interaction with someone who lives in a mobile home, and Daryl noted that at a certain point in his life, he actually lived in a mobile home himself. So just as an aside, part of the issue with our electric rates is that the full benefit of that sometimes is not realized by people. We can have lower rates compared to our neighboring utilities, but if your home is not super efficient or not well insulated, and or you're using a lot more to stay warm, you don't get the benefit of that rate. Let me also offer an observation here too. A lot of what we heard during the recent spate of high bills was that people had not made any changes in terms of what they were doing differently. That actually drives up your cost. Depending on your heating system, if it's a heat pump in particular, if you keep your thermostat set at a certain level, when temperatures get below freezing and stay below freezing, the efficiency of those units also drops, and they actually have to work harder and pull a lot more electricity to keep the same temperature. So some of the confusion was, well, we didn't make any changes. Why did the bill go up? actually, when people did not make adjustments, that did drive up the costs. Daryl kind of touched on that last night. He also noted that the summer months are coming up, and depending on your personal preferences for comfort and use of air conditioning, that's also likely to drive up some bills and put further strain on the electric grid. That concluded Vice Mayor Updike's comments. We then moved on to Councilman Dwight Evans, who also thanked everyone who was personally in attendance at the meeting and also those who were watching via YouTube and on TV. He noted that he gets a lot of comments and questions from people who are participating and engaging with the meetings, and he does his best to try to answer those questions promptly and correctly. Next was Councilman Dave Foster, who also thanked everyone for being present and continued, in his words, I'll wait for the train to pass here while I'm talking. Councilman Dave Foster said he was kind of working off the comments made by Vice Mayor Updike, and noted these rising electric costs are not pleasant for anybody. Nobody is particularly happy about it, and it's really a pain that we all have to endure. He did note that in the previous month, the town absorbed $2.3 million of the $3.5 million bill that we received. Again, we had to pay AMP $3.5 million just to get the power to people before they ever used it. And we did not recover all of that cost. We basically only passed along $1.2 million to the customers. Unfortunately, that's still a high burden for most people to bear. And when you add usage on top of that, it was a really unpleasant situation for everybody. Councilman Foster noted, though, that the town's cash position in electric particularly has decreased significantly over the years. That's basically directly related to the fact that we have been absorbing costs on behalf of the customers. Again, there's two parts to your bill. There's the part that costs money to actually get the power to you before you ever use it. Those costs are continuing to rise. There are several reasons for that. A lot of that's going to be addressed in a town hall meeting we've scheduled for April 14th. The other part of your bill, and I'm simplifying it way too much, is then what you use from there. Going back to the cost of what we have to pay just to be in the business and to get the power to you. Previous councils over the years have absorbed those costs and have not passed them on. However, the effect of that is the rates were also so low that we were not recovering those. And we got to a point where we had to raise the rates for the usage and also to continue to minimize absorbing those costs because that's not a business model that is sustainable. Switching gears, Councilman Foster then noted his experience last year with a group called Mission Serve. That is a ministry that works with youth in church groups primarily for teenagers, where they bring them from all over the country and work on projects in certain areas, basically to do home improvements for folks who can't afford to do that themselves. And when I say home improvements, it's things like roof repair, construction of handicap ramps. It's really interesting and awesome work they do. And I can speak to that personally because my church has been involved in that and my family personally. So, Mission Serve is focused primarily, I would say, in the southeastern United States, but they have a broad reach. And every summer they identify areas where they send these young people with oversight from construction professionals and adults to provide services to folks who otherwise could not afford it. Getting back to Dave's comments, Mission Serve came to Bedford last summer. They renovated 8 homes. And again, these are all volunteers ranging in age from probably 12 years old up to the adults who are working with them. They are coming back to Bedford this summer. They had a good experience here. They were pleased with their ability to serve the community. And whereas they did 8 homes last year, they're looking to improve 10 homes. Dave noted that the average cost for materials is about $2,000 per home. And noted that if anybody is so inclined, the town is willing to accept donations on behalf of Mission Serve. If you'd like to donate, you can send a check to the town of Bedford, and on the memo line, note that your intent is for that money to go to Mission Serve. So if you make a donation, send it to pay to the order of the town of Bedford, but put on the memo line Mission Serve. Councilman Foster concluded by noting that April 5th is Easter Sunday and asked that people who were so inclined would consider attending an Easter service of their choice at a church of their choice. He also noted that April 21st is the last date to vote on the constitutional amendment related to proposed redistricting in Virginia. He shared his view that voters should educate themselves, but certainly exercise their right to vote. Council comments concluded with Mayor C.G. Stanley also recognizing Sarah Broughton, who was the wife of Bruce Johansson. We went on further to explain that, in addition to the fact that Sarah was the executive director of the Bauer Center, she performed that work and accepted no pay for it. And that was just an example of how much she loved Bedford and was willing to sacrifice and serve on its behalf. In addition to those great community accomplishments of Sarah, she was just an incredibly kind person. Those of us who were blessed to know her personally really just enjoyed interacting with her. And she leaves a great legacy of achievement and just the reflection of being a really great person that was good to know. Next on the agenda was a report of council committees, and Vice Mayor Updike noted that the Streets Committee had met and working on a recommended policy for placement of banners, which will come before the full council for review and action very soon. There were no revisions to the agenda, so we moved forward. We did have a public hearing last night related to a conditional use permit for a homestay at 1307 Boone Drive. The request was made by Courtney Holdren, who is the property owner. Homestays, for lack of a better term, homestay is the zoning definition for what these are for our purposes, but effectively we're talking about things that you might know as Airbnbs or homes that you can rent through VRBO and sites like that. Not that I am endorsing any particular company offering those services. Mr. Holdren owns a house on 1307 Boone Drive, and he was requesting permission from council for a conditional use permit to operate that kind of business. Mr. Holdren did speak during the public hearing and noted that he had sent an email to council further explaining what he was doing and why, verified that everyone present had received that, and closed by thanking council for its consideration. There being no other speakers, the public hearing was then closed. Moving on to new business, there was proposed action on the conditional use request for the homestay at 1307 Boone Drive. The background is that on January 7th, the Planning Commission held a public hearing to decide whether the property located at 1307 Boone Drive could be recommended for approval for a homestay change of use. At the Planning Commission meeting, the applicant and one adjacent owner spoke at the public hearing. The citizen who spoke owns an adjoining house that has an existing driveway back to the subject parcel, which is partially through their property, as shown on a plat when he recently purchased his property. While he did not object to the request, the neighbor said he was concerned about unclear access and liability for visitors through the driveway portion that is on their property and not within the deeded private right-of-way from Boone Drive. The applicant noted that the driveway had been there for many years. As part of their discussion, the members of the Planning Commission discussed if a condition could be placed related to the neighbor's concern about the driveway that encumbers his property. Planning Commission members determined that since it was a change of use, they could place a condition that the unshared driveway must reflect the plat. A motion passed unanimously by the Planning Commission on January 7th to recommend approval of the request with the one condition, and that condition was access to the proposed homestay would be moved within the platted easement beyond the shared portion. Last night, Town Council was requested to consider whether or not to approve the conditional use permit, and it was noted that Council could amend or impose any conditions if needed. Mayor Stanley opened discussion of the matter by asking if any councilman had questions or comments. Councilman Foreman noted that he had received the emails from Mr. Holdren and understood that pretty well. At that point, town attorney Mike Lockaby interjected and noted that he and Community Development Director Mary Zirkle had convened since the Planning Commission meeting about the condition that was recommended. The concern was that the town does not necessarily wish to embroil itself in a potential dispute between neighbors over a civil matter that really is not something that affects the town's interest. And Mr. Lockaby noted that the resolution before council reflected that discussion, and the recommendation before them was, rather than getting into the middle of a potential dispute between neighbors, simply to ensure that there was legal access to the property where the permit was being considered. Councilman Dave Foster then also asked about the fact that the Planning Commission was fairly specific in its recommendation. Mr. Lockaby advised that Planning Commission carries weight in their advisory capacity, but it is within the purview of council to ultimately take action, and it is reasonable for council to make changes if it sees fit to do so. Councilman Foreman then asked about what might happen if there were any potential zoning complaints related to the use in the future. Ms. Zirkle noted that our zoning ordinance, section 808, addresses the process wherein that could take place. Mr. Holdren then came and responded to some questions from Vice Mayor Updike about the driveway access and the progress in which Mr. Holdren and his neighbor might be making to resolve that issue. Ultimately, Mayor Stanley made a motion to approve a conditional use permit for a homestay use at 1307 Boone Drive with the condition that legal physical access to a public road is provided. That motion was seconded by Councilman Dave Foster and was unanimously approved 6-0 by all members present. Of course, Councilman Stacey Haley was absent for the meeting. Next item of new business related to closing Macon Street to through traffic on a temporary basis. Macon Street is a public right-of-way that provides a connection from 4th Street westward to Baldwin Street. Although it is maintained in accordance with applicable right-of-way standards in portions, primarily in the areas where it is close to the intersections with Baldwin and 4th Streets, to date, the middle portion of the road has not been maintained in accordance with the standards of the Virginia Department of Transportation or the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. At various times, the town has provided minimal surface treatment, but conditions of this specific area, particularly a notable increase in standing water and lack of drainage, have rendered this portion hazardous for through traffic. We're also aware of the fact that in addition to the poor condition of the middle of this public street, potentially causing problems for motorists, it's also been the site of some potential nuisance problems such as illegal dumping and trespassing. In order to minimize the potential for damage to vehicles and to evaluate appropriate strategies to provide a road facility that would fully comply with applicable right-of-way standards, staff is proposing that the portion of Macon Street between its intersection with Rough Drive and proceeding eastward to the property identified as 950 Macon Street be closed to through traffic until such time as an appropriate remediation for this portion is identified by the town. Physical barriers will be installed and maintained by the Public Works Department, which will also accommodate requests for access by owners of adjacent properties and others who have legitimate needs for access there who may be impacted by the closure. We did speak with a couple of people who were present there last night and kind of give them the details on how that will be handled. But for anyone else who has a legitimate reason for needing passage through this area or access to adjacent properties within the middle of Macon Street, we ask that you would contact the Public Works Department directly at 540-587-6081 and our director there, Tom Woodard, who will do his best to accommodate those requests. Last night, Town Council was requested to adopt a resolution closing Macon Street to through traffic on a temporary basis as described. That motion was made by Vice Mayor Updike, seconded by Councilman Dwight Evans. There was further discussion amongst council members to be sure that we don't cut off people who do need legitimate access to their properties. We also noted that that affects, town operations as well, particularly our electric department. There is a transmission line through this section that they will also require access to maintain. So that motion was passed unanimously, 6-0, with Councilman Haley being absent. And with that action, the town council meeting was then adjourned. Looking ahead in the schedule, the next regularly scheduled meeting of council is scheduled to take place on Tuesday, April the 7th, 7 p.m. Also wanted to let folks know we are having a town hall meeting on Tuesday, April the 14th at 6 o'clock p.m., I believe. That's going to be hosted by Paul Beckhusen, who is an official with AMP. That's American Municipal Power. Those are the folks that we buy our power from on behalf of the community. Again, we don't generate all of our own power in town, and we have to purchase the remaining power needs of the community from other sources. Been a little bit of confusion about that out in the public as to why we buy it from AMP and not AEP. There was a time over 20 years ago when we did purchase from AEP, but we joined AMP, which stands for originally American Municipal Power, back about 20 years ago, because in addition to being a company that provides access to energy, it's basically an association of municipal utilities, much like Bedford, and our operating needs are a little bit different. One of the benefits of membership in AMP is that, again, we talked about the fact we don't generate a lot of our own power. The town owns two facilities. One is the hydro plant up on the James River, and the other is a solar generating facility at our landfill. Beyond that, through our membership in AMP, we are also able to buy capacity in other projects in other places. We do have part ownership in a natural gas-fired facility in Ohio. We have capacity in a remaining coal-fired plant in Illinois. These are long-term contracts. Obviously, we talked about what's going on in the economy and the fact that these operators, particularly of the fossil fuel variety, are a little concerned about their ability to continue to operate in light of certain regulations that discourage that. So the two projects I mentioned are long-term projects. I know the one coal-fired plant in Illinois is something that I think we entered about 20 years ago, and that was a 40-year agreement. And at the time, again, coal-fired plants being very efficient, although there are obviously some other concerns about them, that seemed to be a good investment back around 2006. Thus the long-term investment. One thing I want to mention is that particular plant located within Illinois is scheduled to be closed before its retirement date of 2046. The most recent leadership in the state of Illinois has moved that back to the mid-2030s, and there are always active efforts to shut it down immediately. I bring that up because around the same time we invested in that project, we invested in another proposed coal-fired plant that was never constructed. Unfortunately, we had to spend some money through AMP to participate in that project. That was ultimately never built, so there are sunk costs there that we have to bear. Again, electricity is a fairly complicated business, and we think Mr. Beckhusen will explain that a little bit better than what I just attempted to do. But the other thing, too, is to note the nature of AMP itself. They are a power company, and they provide us access and also give us guidance on things, like I mentioned, where beyond what we generate and what we have purchased into through AMP, they then help us find resources to meet the gaps and to make sure that you have the energy you need to stay warm or cook your dinner or whatever you need it for. We're constantly looking for new sources of that. One thing I'll let you know is at our April 7th meeting, through AMP, we have the opportunity to buy up to 3 megawatts of power in a natural gas facility here in Virginia in Loudoun County. And we're going to ask council to take action to do that, again, to build up our reliability and the things that we have direct control over. But in the meantime, there are certain economic factors at play, and we've asked Mr. Beckhusen to come in and explain that. I know there were some concerns about the objectivity of that presentation, but basically what we'll tell you is we felt it was appropriate because AMP is our largest source of purchase power costs. And so we asked Mr. Beckhusen to come explain to the town as much as the citizens as to how that works and what the trends are. Without knowing exactly what Mr. Beckhusen will say, I do expect that a big part of his discussion will be the rising costs of power based on the retirement of facilities, some of which were touched upon last night and some of which I just mentioned. The intent for the meeting is to provide as much information as possible about what's happening and future trends. We invite everyone to come out on April 14th who can. Again, that's after the next council meeting. If you can't make it, we will be live streaming that, and we will also be recording that. Do ask that folks, try to be respectful of Mr. Beckhusen and receptive of the information, even though it might not be what any of us want to hear. But anyway, just kind of want to give some background into that. Again, I will be joining you again, good Lord willing, on Wednesday, April 8th after the April 7th council meeting. Till then, I hope that everyone is experiencing good health and good fortune, and that the weather settles into some kind of pattern that is agreeable to all of us. Till then, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for your interest, and thank you for your contributions to the world's best little town.